Today we're going to be covering implicit intents. So for this one, the first thing that you need to do as always is go to Canvas and download the implicit intents template. This will give you the code that you're looking at the screen right now. So we will have two different activities, the main activity and the empty activity. For the main activity, you will have a simple layout with an edit text, a text view, and a button, and just a boilerplate on create method. For the empty activity, you will have an image view and a text view, and as well an empty onCreate method. So for this one, what we're going to be doing is split into two parts. First, we're going to use the main activity to take the text that we enter in the edit text and send it to some other application that can handle text data such as a text message. For the second part, we're going to be reading an implicit intent such that whenever that one happens, our app will be provided as an option to open that intent using the empty activity. So we're going to start with creating implicit intents from our application. So first we're going to go to our code and just get some references to the content. So the first thing that we need to do in order to send the message to wherever we want to is to have the text of the message. So for this one, just do what we've done before, just find the view by ID and then get the text of it. So this is going to be the message text, then we can get the message itself. It's gonna be get text. Let's convert it to a string because that's an editable version of it and we just need the text version of it. So we want to create an intent, so just create an intent. Now this is where you're gonna find the difference between explicit intents and implicit intents. For explicit intents, we will give it the context and the activity that we want to target. Let's say we wanted to open this one with the activity.class. So that will be an explicit intent. For implicit intents, we don't provide any of that information. We just say create an empty intent. Then what we say is that we specify the type of information and the type of intent. So for this one, we're gonna use the set action. So set action determines the type of intent that you want to create. So in this case, you will have a various selection of options. For this one, we're gonna go with applications that can handle the action send. So this means that deliver some data to someone else. So when you have an applications that are able to send data to someone else will have an intent filter for the action sent. So when we send this one, we're just asking Android that this intent is meant for apps that can handle this action. Now, since we're sending something to someone else, we're gonna say that the intent will have some extra. So let's put extra, and in this case, we're gonna be using a specific type of extra that is intent.extra text. So in this case, unlike when we're using explicit intents that we can use the keys that we want because we're the ones using it, here we're using pre-made keys for the information that you're putting into the intent so that any other app developed by someone else actually knows that this kind of item exists and can read the data from it. If we were to go with something like key as the key for the extra, then some other developer is not aware that that exists. So that's why we're using one of the pre-made keys for the data. And here we're just gonna pass on the message that we got from our text. Now once that's done, we have to also specify for the intent the type of data. So for this we use the set type, and in this case it's gonna be text plain data. So when an app reads this intent, it will say, what is the type of data that you have? Oh, it's a text plain. Then I will look for the extra text data or extra inside of that intent. Now we have to make sure that our application can actually read the intent. So for this one, we ask the intent to try to resolve an activity. So basically what we're doing here is asking Android, hey Android, do you know if there's an application installed in this phone that can possibly handle this intent? And if the response is yes, I have one or more applications, then we will be able to just say, okay, then start the activity with this intent. And just as before, here what we're saying is to start the activity. Which activity? Whichever activity is the one that is resolved as being able to open or handle an intent that is meant to send information in text form. So that's pretty much it for creating the implicit intent. We are not telling it who is going to be opening this information or this intent, but we're giving it some instructions on what type of data and what is the intent of our intent. So the next thing we need to do is plain simply go on creating that feature inside of our app. So we need to make sure that that happens when we click the button send. So for that one, let's go here. Let's get a reference to the button. So for that one, we will have to create a button variable. So this is going to be the send button. Just find it by ID. I'm pretty sure it's called send button as well. Yes. And then we're gonna say send button dot set on click listener. Now we don't have on click listener yet, so let's create one. Send listener. And we are gonna simply move all of this functionality not when the app is created, but so it happens when we click on the button. So send listener. So when we click the button is when these things will happen. You will take the message that we enter into the UI and send it as an intent to be opened by some other application in our phone. So now we can click on run our app. Let's go to our any data. That will restart the application. Okay, so let's enter something here. Say proposal due to set. Then just click on send. And this is the Android saying, hi, I have more than one application that can open this kind of intent. So let's choose messages. Let's say just once. And this will bring up the messaging app. So let's choose an existing contact. This is no longer what our application is doing. This is already some other application. And as you can see here, the messaging app, when it receives an intent that is send text, it goes and procures the extra that is inside of the extra text or with the extra text key. So that's our message, and that's basically an implicit intent. Now, the second end of the spectrum is to do what the messages app just did. It got an intent that was created somewhere else or by someone else in the app and was able to respond to it. So for that one, we are going to need to create something called an intent filter. So for that one, we will actually need to go into our XML for our Android manifest, so you can find it inside of app, manifests, Android manifest. Now we want to specify the filter inside of the activity that will respond to it. So this is not done at the app level, but at the activity level. So you specify which activity will be opened to handle the intent. Why do we do it at an activity level? Because as you can see here, you are starting a particular activity. So in our case, we want it to be the empty activity. So let's go to the manifest and let's create an intent filter for it. So intent filter, intent filter. So as you can see here, the creation or the establishing an activity as the activity to be opened when the app is opened for the first time, it's also an intent filter. So it means that when the intent action is main, then it will establish the main activity as the launcher activity. So even though we were not explicitly doing it, we were already using intent filters. So for this one, what we're going to be doing is an intent filter such that clicking an URL that meets a specific criteria will result in our app being able to respond to that. So for this one, we're going to go ahead and copy paste this filter. So what we're saying is that the data that specifies the type of filter is going to be an URI, so it's going to be HTTPS scheme, and the host will be patreon.com. So basically, this means that whenever an URI is clicked, that means the format that it starts with https www.patreon.com, then our app will be one of the options to open that link. Now, then we specify a set of instructions to our intent to determine what type of intent is going to be handled. So just as we did with when we created it, that we said, oh, the action of this intent is to send data. In our case, the action of this intent is to view data. So when you click a link, it generally refers to a view action, so it will be the appropriate. Now we want to make sure that this can be considered the default option to open that kind of intent. And since it's something that may happen inside of browser, then we have to establish as that category that it's browsable. So that basically tells Android that it can be triggered from a browser. So after this, you can also go to Tools, App Leaks Assistant, and this you will have an editor that will allow you to look at URL mappings. So to make sure that this is a valid mapping of an URI, so you can just select the base URI and you can look at all of the information of it. So you will see that the scheme and the host, if you have a port, then you can set it there. You can also specify the MIME type. This is the multimedia type resource. In the case of the text, then we established that the type was plain text data. So you could establish it here that you will only respond to URIs or intents that have that particular mapping. You can delete URIs, and let me show you one more thing. Let's create the intent filter once again. So this is going to be on the interactivity. So let's create the intent filter with https patreon.com. Perfect. Leaks Assistant will allow you to test your links. So for instance, you want to see if this link will be resulting in your app responding to it. So let's say that we click a link that looks like this. Will it try to open with our app? Yes. if we try to open something that looks like this, will it open with our app? No, it will not. So you can play with it to open URIs using the URL assistant or the link assistant from Android Studio. In our case, we're just gonna be using this simple intent filter. Now, once we create this intent filter, it means that it will open the activity in the activity. Now, how do we get the data and how do we work with it? Well, just the same way you did with the previous intents that we created. So you create an intent and then just call get intent. It doesn't matter if the intent was created from one activity transitioning to another or from a different app opening this activity, there will be an intent, so you can access it the same way. Now what we're going to be working on is adding a little bit of an extra functionality to this empty activity. So the first thing that we're going to do is get the information from what was the URI clicked with this intent. Since this is an um, link, then we can just simply go and then create it as a global variable. URI click is going to be an URI, not a string. So what we're gonna get is that the URI clicked is gonna be the intent dot get data. So this will give us the URI that was clicked when triggering this intent. Now let's parse this URI. So we're gonna just split it into a couple parts. So um, URI clicked dot get scheme. Let's get the scheme. Let's get the host. And let's get the path of this URI. In this case, these are the only things that exist within this particular type of URIs. We're not using a port, but if you're using a custom URL from a different website, you may actually require the port. Or if you're looking at something like processing emails or the sorts. So let's do this. URI clicked is going to be, we're getting the scheme, the host, and the path. So what we want to do here is look at the information. So all of these can produce a null pointer extension. So you can create assertions. If you don't know what assertions are, they are just little checks that can verify whether a true or false statement is true or false, and it will just not execute the code underneath unless it is true. So if this one is null, then it will not run this line of code, or it will not try to run it because that will cause a null pointer exception. In our case, we don't really need to do that because we're looking at URLs that will always be valid. So this one is perfect, and we're gonna create a string message URL details, and this is going to be an empty string. And here what we're gonna be doing is just adding to those details the information that we're extracting from the URI itself. So we're gonna say scheme, gonna do this, right? The next one is gonna be here. Right click dot get host, and for the path as well. So all that we're doing here is just creating a really big string that has all of the information from the URI as we extracted it into pieces. Now here's where we are going to add just a little bit more complex UI elements. So let's create an action bar or uh, a snack bar. That would be the most ideal situation for this. So for snack bar, all we have to say is snack bar equals snack bar, similar to a toast that tester make, and we're gonna have a view. So in this case, this is context. We have the message, which is going to be the URL details. Then how long it's gonna be? It's gonna be a long one, so just do snack bar dot length long. Then let's set an action we want to um, show. Call it show, and we're gonna be working on this in a couple of moments. Action listener. Okay. Dot show. So now we need an action listener that can actually work for us. So in this case, what we want to do is the same thing that we did in the main activity. Just create a on-click listener object, action listener, and this is going to be a new on-click listener. This requires a view. Okay, I'll have to fix something in this, but first let's finish the code for the action listener. So let's just gonna get the text view that we have in this particular element. So text view is gonna be the label, find view by ID, r.id dot link label, and let's just do label dot set text to be the one that we have in the URI click.toString. So this is going to be simply putting the value of the URL that we opened that triggered the opening of our activity into the label that we have at the top here. So let's go back to this snack bar creation. We have to have a semicolon here. The snack bar requires a view. We're using this. Activity Java string. Resolve the method snack bar. Details is no, this is not a context. This is the current view. So let's try to get the current focus. We're on create activity stands from. Okay, let's go back to our running our application. So to our Android emulator, and we're just gonna go to browser, and we're gonna click on a link that is from the Patreon website. So in this case, it's gonna be the terms of use, and since it's a link that starts with patreon.com, we'll have the option that goes in to open it using either the empty activity or Chrome. So in this case, we're gonna say, just for these ones, open it using the empty activity. And that didn't work. We had an error here on create, not suitable parent found for the snack bar. Okay, then we need to create a toolbar in order for us to create it. So let's go ahead and create a toolbar. Find it by ID. So r.id dot should be toolbar. So what we're gonna have to do is create a toolbar or a container for our snack bar to be able to be created. So what we're gonna be doing is creating the toolbar at the very top. We're gonna say that it's going to be a support action toolbar, so it appears with options for us to create the snack bar. So the toolbar. So let's create a button, floating action button with the tree button. Find view by ID, and then let's see r.id dot, and this will be a fab button. Now we're gonna say that when we click this button, something will happen. This is not the this is the action button. So we're gonna set the click listener for it. We have to create one, and then inside of it is where we're gonna be able to access the view. So let's go up here on this piece of code, and we'll just modify it. So instead of action listener, it's gonna be the button listener. Okay, so we have a button listener. So here, all that we're doing is creating a new button. We're just using a floating action button, which is gonna look just a little bit different. We might not actually even need the toolbar, now that I think about it. Yeah, we're just using the button for the view. So let's go here. Say that instead of doing this, we're gonna go here, and then we're gonna access the view that triggered this button. So we're linking the snack bar here. We don't need the toolbar. I'm using just a button for it. So let's run it again. Well, it doesn't happen automatically. Okay, so that will open our application once it's installed, but we don't want it to open from the get-go. So we're just gonna open it from here. Perfect. Just once. Open empty activity. Okay, perfect. So as you can see, we just added a little button on the bottom right. So this button is different from the buttons that we used before because it's a floating action button. So it's just a more advanced UI. So as you can see, it doesn't look like a button that like the ones we've been using thus far. That are like really old style buttons. This is an action button, which is a better looking button, if that makes sense. So we're gonna be looking at more advanced UI elements as well. So here you can see we have the text view and the image view, and then the action button is being created on this activity on top of it. So what we're gonna be looking at is the rest of the application. So when we click here, it's gonna say the information that we got from the content. So it's the set, the host, and the path. And we have an action button on the very bottom. So if we click on that button, we have the URI that triggered this intent on top of here. So that's it for implicit intents. Now with this example, I also wanted to show you more additional UI elements that are going to be a little bit more advanced that we're going to be looking into in detail in the future. But as you can see, this is just a button with extra functionality. The button actually renders differently. The same thing with the snack bar, which is a more advanced version of the simple toast that we'll be looking up to thus far. So that is everything for this particular walkthrough. If you want to go into a little bit more of detail with this, you can simply create intents for different actions, different URLs, or if you want, you can create an intent that, so you can create an activity, and instead of saying that the intent that you're looking at is a view in action, you can set it so it is without any data, that it is, for instance, an action sent intent. And in that case, you can actually use that activity to respond to this intent without saying directly open this particular activity on my app. So thank you very much for going through, and I hope that it works for you. If you have any questions, let me know, and have a good rest of your day.